All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for our second annual ESG conference today. We hope you've had a great day learning more about our state of impact report, learning from different speakers from every industry, and seeing how impact is defined in different companies through our alumni, our student, and our corporate partner network. We're excited for our closing keynote to begin. And for our closing keynote, we're going to have a fireside chat more about how we feel about impact and industry's analysis of it. We're joined by two phenomenal speakers here today. Oren Marcella, the head of U.S. Government Affairs at GE Healthcare. Oren is an experienced government affairs executive with a demonstrated history of success in Washington and skilled in policy development, business strategy, communications, and public speaking. Oren graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Government from Mary Washington College. And on my right or left, we have Kisa Shreen, a business strategist and author. If you're curious, the book you saw at the table when you came in is Kisa's book. Please, if you haven't picked one up yet, I think we only have 2 or 3 copies left. So on the way out, remember to take one. Kisa consults companies in a range of industries and sizes in developing ESG and corporate culture policies. She's also the author of Gambling on Green, Uncovering the Balance, what you saw among revenues, reputation, ESG, which you saw outside, and corporate compassion culture, leading your business towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is a broadcast, television, and live stream contributor and writer who's appeared on numerous outlets, including Black Enterprise, Cheddar News, CNBC, CBS, Essence, FinTech TV, and Latina. She serves on numerous boards and committees, including Series President's Council. Kisa is co-founder of Refinitiv Sustainability Perspectives podcast, recognized as an industry leader. The show discusses global ESG trends, regulations, and investment strategies with asset managers, asset owners, and C-suite sustainability and corporate officers. Kisa is a fundamentals of sustainability accounting credential holder and is a certified anti-money laundering specialist. She holds a BA from Salem College and MA from New York University and received an executive education certificate from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania in investment strategies and portfolio management. I just want to thank both of you for joining us here today and just give you both a moment to do any welcome remarks that you'd like to give.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I have to say that I really appreciate everyone broadly, but I really recognize that the students are really doing great work. You did work to get us all here today, as well as Neva and Julia. So thank you so much for having us.
And I just want to acknowledge that Kisa's biography and credentials are a lot longer than mine. Honored to be here on this panel with you, and I just want to thank all of you in the audience in Maryland School of Business for putting this conference on and for inviting me to be a part of it. I work for GE Healthcare. I've been part of the organization for almost 14 years now, and it's a special place in corporate America, I feel, and I feel, broadly as companies, we have a tremendous responsibility to the public, especially now, in terms of trust. And as trust, as we've seen trust erode, public trust erode with other institutions like government, media, we're not seeing that with trust in companies. In fact, we're seeing an uptick in trust in companies. So I think we all have a tremendous responsibility to the public and to our employees because of that.
Thank you both. So I want to start with an excerpt from our State of Impact report. In the last decade, a new sense of value has emerged in society and corporate America, a sense of environmental or social value, a sense of greater responsibility to the world we all live in. While these definitions of value were once seen as mutually exclusive, today they are proving to be two sides of the same coin. More than ever before, consumers demand values-based commitments to sustainability and social good from brands in every industry. It's vital in the modern business ecosystem that corporations demonstrate a commitment to optimizing their impact on people and the environment. In our reports, we define these commitments as environmental and social value creation, or ESVC. Can you tell us more about the state of environmental and social value creation for your specific industries and more specifically in each of your organizations? Or if you don't mind starting.
Sure, so I feel like we have a built-in advantage in the healthcare industry. We lead with the S of ESG, and every one of us is part of this industry because we want to heal. And so coming to work with that passion is a real advantage for folks, whether you're working at a hospital, a doctor's office, a nursing home, or you're innovating technology to care for patients like we do at GE Healthcare. So I feel like we've got that social going on in the healthcare industry. For us at GE and GE Healthcare, we've been part of General Electric for over 100 years, and GE has always tried to lead with the E of it. And so focusing on those climate goals is really important for us. And in healthcare, when we separate from GE in January, we're going to pull that piece forward with us.
So I'm gonna go from an economics and financial services perspective. You would be econ majors or first major. Okay. So others of you are probably familiar with Milton Friedman. So he was this big time economist back in the 1900s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. And he really focused on the his thought, that businesses are here to make money, that we are not here to be philanthropic other than, organized foundation. We are not here to give back to the community. We are not here to ensure there is climate justice. We're not here to ensure that we have a planet in the next 100 years. We are here to make money. He made that statement, I believe, in the early 1980s in the New York Times, and it was gospel to a lot of people, right? Fast forward 20 years or so, you have the likes of Larry Fink and others who are saying, wow, we really need to stop and take a look at how we're treating our employees, how we're treating our consumers, and for those of us in this area, what we're doing for investors, what options we're giving to investors. So we're seeing that open really broadly from a financial services perspective and also from an economics perspective as well. There's an organization called the TCFD, Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure, and they're leaders of that economics background. They really see the purpose in banks, financial services firms, investors really leaning in to understand what harms that are happening to the climate based on their work and really mitigating those harms. And I think moving forward, we'll begin to see lots of consolidation. We'll talk about that a bit more. Consolidation around standardizing what financial services firms and other industries can do to make sure we're all on the same page with mitigating some of these issues. But I wanted to point out that we've seen a complete 180 from where we were in financial services and the field of economics 30, 40 years ago to where we are now. And it's looking a whole lot better.
And it's so exciting seeing these differences decades later, how we've driven where we need to get to. Discussing that, what do you feel can be done to promote this widespread adoption of an ESDC-centric culture that's expansive enough to apply to any industry and mutually beneficial for executives, employees, and other companies? What are your thoughts, Kisa?
So I'll say two things we've done. First is changing the culture. I want to talk about that. And then the second thing is measurement, which we'll talk more about as well. I'm sure you've heard about changing the culture. How do we do that? I don't know how many of you have heard of business resource groups, also called employee resource groups. They date back to the days, They date back to the days of Xerox in 1969, 1970. Basically, racial inequity was, we saw what happened in 2020. Think about 1969 and about where it was then. Get a picture. Racial inequity was such a huge issue that Xerox, the CEO, said, we're going to have to do something about this. Let's put together a group of employees who are Black, who identify as Black, so we can understand what we can do here at Xerox and how we can engage the community. So if we look at where we are now, changing the culture really means engaging those people who are inside the company, as well as the communities where we do business. One thing that Carolyn said earlier in our first keynote session is that the days are gone when businesses can just drop into a community and talk about what they're going to do with it without engaging them, right? In the past, we've seen, particularly with indigenous communities, businesses just going there, not hiring, not respecting the values and the culture of the community, and understanding that engagement is needed before you go there. No, they go there, they set up shop, then they handle their business. And those sorts of things are seen as archaic now. So first of all, changing the culture, being more inclusive around the people who are inside the business as well as externally. And the second thing that I think is to take measurement seriously. We hear all the time, if it's not measured, then it doesn't matter, it doesn't count. So really holding businesses accountable for measuring what they're doing, not just around environment and climate, but also citizen metrics around social. That's a lot more difficult to do. But workplace engagement, employee engagement, as well as some of the other areas we talked about today. So those are 2 areas I focus on.
And that's really exciting to hear, especially with the savior complex of corporations, and it can be taken in so many ways. First, being aware of it, and then being actively in that mindset of not coming in with the savior mindset is so key to get there. Warren, what are your thoughts?
So I thought about this a little bit differently, and I thought about it from the perspective of if I'm a leader inside of a company, any company, either a healthcare company, financial services, any part of any industry, big or small. What are the key things that we need as a company to foster a culture, no matter what we do, that is going to grow ESG opportunities and that kind of culture? And I thought about it, and I thought about our own company, and I think it starts with a culture around ethics and compliance, and training your employees around ethics and compliance. Always doing the right thing in every circumstance, and knowing what the right thing, and being able to speak up, and being ethical, and being compliant, knowing what that means, and talking about that as a company, and really instilling that in your culture. GE, we are, one of the first multinational companies in the world. Started here in America, now we operate in 160 countries. We better have good ethics and compliance. And I think that can be a good foundation for ESG culture and initiatives. Second thing I thought about, which is really important to us at GE that can foster this kind of culture anywhere, is a focus on safety and well-being. Safety and well-being of your colleagues at work, but also the customers that you serve. So we start every big meeting at GE with a safety moment. And sometimes it's something as simple as at home and mental health through this pandemic, and reminding folks that it's okay not to be okay. And other times people are bringing forward specific examples of things that may have happened, things that might have gone wrong in the workplace, where there was an accident or there was an injury, and how do we prevent that? How do we foster a culture around safety and well-being? And we measure safety at GE. The third, I think, that every company can and should do is diversity and inclusion, and have a focus on that. Diverse companies perform better, and diverse and inclusive companies perform best. And so, that's something that no matter what industry you're in, you can take advantage of. And then the fourth, I think, this is something we've been thinking about for a while at GE Healthcare, is fostering that culture of ownership within your company, and feeling accountable to your colleagues. Owners are more accountable than non-owners to a company, to a culture. And I think those to me are the foundations and sort of cultural elements that allow for good ESG culture to grow in the company.
I think that too. I love that the word ties measurement, but also I heard a lot of social plan on. I heard safe, which sounds like physical and mental safety, or build huge. It's finally being recognized. Then also, in addition to that, there's the governance piece, which many times we don't focus on. Corporate ethics. One of the things that I found in my book and research is that when a company loses its reputation, that's the first step in a steep hill going downhill. So really focusing in on ethics and making sure that the company operates ethically, and understanding that we have different interpretations of what ethically may be. So let's get on the same page and let's do some training. I think that those are really great tools. And also, again, loving that there is a focus on that and measuring that as well.
I love like you're saying, the intentionality for ethics. Not compliance for the sake of compliance. It's not compliance so we don't get sued. It's not compliance because we have to do this. When we're thinking of the Carnegie or the Friedmans, where we're doing this because it's a letter of the law, it's that ethics that we're incorporating. So it's not compliance for a law, it's compliance for ethics.
Yeah, and if you're a global company, ethics and compliance can be a competitive advantage. Across many of GE's businesses, our customers, some of the biggest customers in the world are governments. And governments want to know that the companies that they're working with, that they can trust them, that they're ethical. And that's, what we've tried to do over the last 120 years at GE as we go out in the world and help the world develop, electrify the world. We want to export, American ethics and American values, around the world.
I think it becomes difficult because American values are work in another country where they have different regulations and different policies and compliance points they have to meet, then it's important to really understand what's that country's regulatory environment, what's that regulatory environment. So there is what GE in this case wants to do, but then there's also what's the country we're operating in, ensure that we're aligned with them.
Absolutely.
So changing gears a little bit, in our report, CSBC uncovered 6 concrete ways companies can generate meaningful measurement improvement, environmental and social performance increase across industries. We call these our 6 different ESBC levers. The 6 levers, which we talked about in the morning keynote as well, are product research, development, and innovation, sustainable production, supply chain management and social procurement, coalitions, financial and in-kind support, and talent management. Can you speak to which of these levers are applicable in your field? What sorts of activities have you seen to be more successful in? Let's start with Lawrence.
Yeah, so I'll touch on 2 of them, and then maybe we can expand later. So the lever that I think we're really good at is product innovation, product R&D and innovation. A couple of examples of how we've used sort of ESG priorities and goals within our business to innovate around products and help society. So one good example is we have a handheld ultrasound called the V-Scan. It's evolved a little bit over the last decade since we've introduced it, and now it's basically, it can fit in your breast pocket, and that's the probe of the ultrasound, and the image can show up on a smartphone. And so we've taken this ultrasound into communities that don't typically have access to ultrasound, and in the developing world, and we're improving maternal and child health all over the world. So that's one thing that we can do, and we're winning that way. And by the way, that's a product, and we sell it for money, and we're helping people at the same time. But the goal is create access to care that wasn't there before. Another area where we've been able to succeed on the sustainability side is in 2 parts of our business. Our service business and keeping our technology, running, 24 hours a day if needed. Think about if you're, a hospital running an emergency department where you need a CT scanner. You need that available all the time. So keeping that running, that's part of our service business, but also extending the life of that equipment so it lasts longer, and so it can be upgraded. So you don't have to buy a new one. That's sustainable, building, the life cycle of your product, having sustainability built into that. And then another related area of our business is our refurbished equipment business called Gold Seal. So you don't have to retire or recycle or throw away every medical device. Once a customer is done with it, you can take it back and refurbish it and sell it to someone else, and maybe sell it to another country, another part of the world that's going to use it for 5 or 10 years. So that is product sustainability. Another area where another lever that we've done, I think, really well at GE, and we're gonna continue to do well at GE Healthcare is in the coalitions and partnerships piece of it. I've had the opportunity to work with GE's foundation on a number of just amazing programs and projects that have really made a difference in the 14 years that I've been at General Electric. One of them, which I hope we're going to carry forward into GE Healthcare, is called GE Girls STEM Camps. And we've done these in cities and communities across America for, at least the last 10 years. And here in the DC area, we have a partnership with Howard University Middle School. And I think it's 6th or 7th, maybe 7th or 8th graders. And we get them for a week in the summer and we bring them to our factory. We show them the magic at work and what advanced manufacturing looks like. We take them to Capitol Hill and they meet with science and technology policymakers and women leaders of our country, so they can hear directly from these amazing folks how they got there. They had similar backgrounds as these girls that were trying to get into science and technology. So that's one thing that we do, and we do it in partnership with educators and nonprofits around the country. A couple other healthcare specific things we've been able to do. One of them is called Safe Surgery. This is a program that we had in our foundation some years ago, where it's basically making sure that healthcare providers in the developing world have access to oxygen in their facilities. That's critically important, for safe surgery. And so we work with NGOs and we build programs around that, and standing up surgical programs in parts of countries that never had it before. Those are just a couple of examples of things that we do. There are many, many more, and we're going to do many more as we separate from GE in the future of GE Healthcare.
I just want to call out to it's fantastic work doing with STEM, especially. We know that representation matters and it's go to these facilities and just what they want to do. It just really matters. So, and just to expand on some of the levers, one of the ones that I appreciated was the product research and innovation. And within the financial services firm, obviously, serving the underbanked, unbanked with alternatives to the typical banking, consumer banking way of doing business is a key one. And I wanted to bring up another industry as well. Doing research for my book, I looked at various industries to see what levers they use. And I recognized, looking at how they didn't use these levers quite so well, looked at the automotive industry. And years ago, seatbelts were lethal for pregnant women. They were the most dangerous element of an automobile for pregnant women. And of course, I wanted to dig in and find out why. That just seems the exact opposite of what it should be. Well, it's because years ago, seatbelts were designed for the average size man. And if you know or have known any or been a pregnant woman, you recognize that even though we can debate what the average size man is, if we never pregnant, you don't fall into that category. It was very dangerous for pregnant women. And so the question is, why were there no pregnant women at the table to help design the seatbelt, to help implement where the seatbelt fit, the dimensions, etc.? And so we talk about the representation piece that shows the importance of product innovation and just how critical it can be for various members of society. So I wanted to focus on product innovation as being a lever and the importance of it, and then case out to be like that for them. Another piece that I think really is important is supply chains. And also in the research, I found that there were many chocolate companies who were being sued for child labor infractions. Basically, there were children in African countries who were working in these cocoa farms. And people said, I want to sue, the Mondelez, Hershey's, etc. I want to sue these companies because we shouldn't have child laborers in Africa. Well, Hershey's, Mondelez, the companies themselves did not employ the children. They had suppliers. Shisha, you know this research as well. They had suppliers who employed these children. Thus, they didn't get impacted. Lawsuit didn't follow through, but it did raise a good question. How can we begin to hold companies accountable? And not necessarily just for the sake of doing so, but so they can have their finger on the pulse of what their suppliers are doing, because they honestly might not know. So what can we do to incentivize and make it more important for them to know? So supply chain work is really important. We talk about it in the environmental space, scope 3 emissions, but in the social space as well, it's really good to work with your suppliers to understand what their policies are around child labor, around human engagement. And if they don't have policies that align with their values, work with them to make sure that they get policies that align with their values, or always get another supplier if they don't want to align with those values. So I think that that's really important. And the third lever I want to call out was talent management. People are the lifeblood of our business. And so if we do not engage with the people inside of our business well, if they don't feel like they're welcome, if they don't feel that they belong there, then they're not going to do their best work. When we don't do our best work, we cannot be innovative. When we're not innovative, we don't help our companies produce the next generation of goods and services. And when that happens, a company is as good as out of business. So mapping that back to the people, it's really important that we engage with talent to make sure that we get the right talent for our business, to make sure that our business is sustainable, and to make sure that the people really feel that what they're doing matters because it does.
I think that's right, and I would also extend talent management out into the communities that we operate in. We need that pipeline, so we want to work with, middle schools like we do, and in high schools, and make sure that technical colleges and really, throughout the educational pathway, that the curriculum is going to be one to set them up for success, to come and work for a company like GE Healthcare in their community. So I think talent management in the community is important as well. Working with the public school systems and community leaders.
It's like what you were talking about, scope 3 emissions, the E everyone knows, but now we're talking scope 3 employment and I guess integration into community, and it's getting the S of scope 3 as well. So it's an interesting way, but also going back to what you were saying about the work you're doing with schools, it's not that you're starting a soccer camp with these schools that has nothing to do with your core business practices. The work you're doing directly works with your core mission, and you're helping get those intentional impacts into the lifeblood of these middle school students and showcasing what they can do in the future. So it's just exciting to see, again, not just with ethics, but our compliance, but also with integrating into the community the intentionality that there is to be successful. So going on a little further, in addition to identifying these levers, CSBC performed an audit of the areas where companies are making an institutional change. There are 3 main categories where corporations are evolving internally in an effort to pull the aforementioned levers. These 3 are operational structure, financing, and measurement and reporting. How have you and your companies and your peers evolved in these categories? Start with you.
Well, the financing piece of my research, I found that that's huge, that many companies, obviously, they want investors to be impressed with their work and invest in them. So that's something that shows the importance of it. We're finding now that a lot of investors are not looking at divestment as an option now. So if you want to say the time when divestment should be an option, or when investors look at it, many investors told me in my research, hey, we're talking about the apartheid era. Yeah, we pulled out of South Africa during that time. We just felt it wasn't smart to be there. So, but that was then, and this is now. Companies are really more focused on engaging. I'll give you an example. I was speaking with a co-head of ESG of a large investment manager, and she was talking about working with a company, packaged goods company that produced razors. And she said that in the past they had the plastic that contained the actual sharp part of the razor, plastic piece. And they worked with them to create something that also encased the razor, but was made out of recyclable material. So that was a very small example, but it's something where she said, there are a lot of razors being produced. There is a lot of plastic, believe it or not, being produced, and we had a lot of investment in that company. So as opposed to pulling back gently and slowly, we said, let's dive in. Let's see how we can really change the tide, if you will. So that's an example of the financing piece.
And just to touch on that, I like how you're talking about investment versus divestment.
Yes.
And going to recent events with Russia and Ukraine, it wasn't a divestment as a whole. There was a divestment from Russia, but there was an investment in Ukraine. So we're seeing that both sides are critical right now.
Yeah, and I think what's behind that is really our focus as retail investors. So those of us who have pensions and 401ks, we're diving in, we're asking questions. We're saying, what, let's let's think about how we can do this better. We're talking to those who are managing our money. So I think that that's the reason why there is so much focus on investing as opposed to divesting. How can we do this right? I talk about it with sin stocks. Many of us don't even use that term anymore because, we have casinos, we have tobacco companies, those were considered sin stocks. But many tobacco companies, believe it or not, are investing in early childhood education around the issue of tobacco and why children shouldn't use tobacco. And we can ask ourselves what's going to be the cash cow if you're looking at investing money and not making sure children don't focus on tobacco. But that's, I guess, for another time. But that's really what these companies are doing now. So that's a strong piece. And also the measurement. We talked about that a bit earlier. So measurement and reporting. From a climate environment perspective, there is the ISSB, which is really bringing together from a sustainability perspective these standards, the National Sustainable Standards Board, bringing together these standards. And my hope is that we can see something in this social space that creates social standards that are comparable, that are measurable, that investors can use, that businesses can use to judge against their peers to see where they fall in the social space. So we're not there yet with social. We're just getting there with environmental and climate. We're not there yet with social, but I'm hopeful to see more of that for the purpose of having comparable, measurable ratings, rankings around where businesses are.
And it's definitely, like you were saying, those sin stocks previously known as, whether we're talking alcohol industries and water investment like Anheuser-Busch, education and video games where it used to be a tool of violence, now it's a tool of knowledge. We're not there yet, but we're seeing those first few steps.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll touch on operational structure for a little bit, because this is where we're seeing a lot of change across industries, and we're really seeing a lot of change internally in GE Healthcare as well. And we are putting together something that we're calling an Enterprise Stewardship Committee that is a place where leaders across the entire enterprise that are focused on things like ESG, risk management, ethics and compliance, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and other enterprise priorities can come together and make sure that these get operationalized throughout the organization. So that's something that I'm quite enthusiastic about within our company, and I'm seeing that in other areas as well. And then to double down on the measuring and reporting, we're seeing more and more diversity reporting by companies in various industries. We're seeing more and more pay equity data out there, which is always a good thing. And I hope that continues. I'm sure it will continue. And then on the environment, we really do need standards, because greenwashing is a thing, I think. And people who are doing it right want to see accountability there. So that's a problem.
Slight off track, but interesting with what you said. Are you familiar with these new potential SEC regulations that are coming with emissions? And if so, do you feel optimism towards them? Do you think this is in the right direction, or is there a lot more work to be done?
I'm not familiar enough to really speak for GE on that, so
Not a problem. It's just been interesting seeing that whole debate recently coming down. Going on, so what recommendations do you have for a company to be successful in ESBC? And can you share some of your best practices and lessons learned?
Yeah, so I talked to a few folks inside the company about this, and our ESG leaders. The great thing for me, I'm in government affairs. Our ESG program sits in global law and policy, so we get to be partners. And I mentioned we are in the process of building this as we look to spinning off of GE. And so what we're trying to do is we need to determine what is most important and drive toward that. And we've spent the better part of the last year looking at what we've done well, what we've been a part of that GE has done well, what we want to carry forward. What pieces of that we want to carry forward into a new GE Healthcare. And so we've decided to focus on really 5 areas. One is improving access access to healthcare. 2 is promoting inclusion and diversity across the enterprise, creating that culture, driving it through the enterprise. Climate is another one. I'm sure there's been a lot of talk about climate today. The circular economy, environmental design, some things that I talked about that's going on in our business. And then another one that, these are real focus in healthcare and other industries like perhaps the financial services is patient data for us, but cybersecurity writ large. That's another focus area that's what we do. So best practices, we're learning, we're taking forward what we've done in GE, what we're seeing across the industry, we're creating that now at the
I love that focus on continued learning as this industry advances, but also that openness to share, because sometimes individuals might see this as, do I give my best competitive advantages? That openness helps us all grow together, and move that conversation forward.
The other thing that we're doing now, and I would encourage all companies to do it, is to, really find a purpose and talk about it all the time. And encourage everybody in the company to say what that means to them. It might not mean the same thing, and it won't mean the same thing to everybody. But our purpose in GE Healthcare is to create a world where healthcare has no limits, right? We're creating and we're driving cultural operating principles based on that purpose. They're going to be amazing for our ESG initiative and amazing for how we work together inside our company, how we show up at hospitals to help providers, cure patients, and how we show up in our communities. So, identify that purpose and live that purpose, and encourage employees to have that purpose and describe what it means to them, have conversations about it. And that's going to create a culture that will drive.
And it's exciting to see you bring back to purpose. With our morning keynote, we were also discussing the importance of purpose and the value that it brings in. Kisa, I'd love your perspective.
Sure, and I want to follow more on your focus on data. That is really what we are going to be discussing about now and hopefully in the future. Privacy issues as related to data, the importance of data, who should have access to data, who shouldn't have access, and why, what was the purpose of having data. So I love the value of that. I would say purpose as well, people as well, and then measurability. So I think did a great job Lauren talking about this effect. People are important in order to be successful. One of the best practices that a company should have is how are we engaging our people inside of the organization. I've mentioned that before, but we cannot focus on that enough. Without having people who understand, who are committed to the business, who are committed to the mission, who understand what unique proposition that the company can bring to the marketplace. Without understanding their role, they really cannot support a business and going to the next level. It also means partnership. So how can we partner with other like companies in our industries? How can we partner with not-for-profits? Partnering with business schools is a great way to do it. I've worked in partnerships for a number of years, and what I'm seeing that moving forward, businesses recognize we can't do this on our own. We need to partner with not-for-profits, with other members in our industry as well. And then really again, focusing on that performance. So measurement, what's important to us? What is the standard for measuring? How are peers doing in that area? Get an understanding of what our competitors are doing in this certain area. And then from there, understanding what those key pillars are, where we need to measure, and moving forward to measure. So people are of the utmost importance. Really focusing on performance, then the purpose should be something that undergirds all of that.
I think constantly hearing this mindset of purpose and how it integrates with people just reiterates how conscious capitalism is even growing more and more in organizations, where it's the metrics matter, but the humanity is also so vital. Next thought. So what are some of those biggest opportunities you see out there in ESBC, and what are those biggest challenges that are left to tackle for us?
So the opportunities for me are education. I've gotten a chance to talk a couple of media outlets, and I was talking to Bloomberg around this whole woke capitalism thing, and yeah, it's just interesting that we're using that term. But one of the things that I share with Bloomberg is that I think that part of the issue with many of the states, for those of you who are freshmen of the states who were saying, oh, we don't want woke, wokeness in our investments. We don't want that to stay. I think there seems to be a miseducation of what is going on here. So if we're looking at ESG as one thing, then that's the first mistake, because ESG investing is not one type of investing. There needs to be education on the fact that there is impact investing, which is what I suspect they're talking about when you're investing simply for social impact, or climate or environmental impact. But then there's ESG integration, which means that you are doing the same sort of stock selection if you're an investor that you did beforehand, but you have an ESG lens, meaning you're understanding what sort of ethical risks a company may bring to your portfolio, right? You're understanding what sort of physical climate risks may exist for a company in your portfolio that's located near water that has floods every year. Those things are important. It has nothing to do with ESG. It has to do with the risk of your portfolio. So where the opportunities are, education. And yes, where the challenges are, I think education. And the reason I say that is because we've seen time and time again that when we have a dialogue, sometimes that can devolve into an argument. It just is what it is. But really focusing on how we can get a message out there, how we can educate investors, retail investors, how we can educate business leaders, and do it in a way that generates understanding and that does not generate the poor, opposite views, issues, and argumentative perspectives that we have now. So opportunities, education, but yet the challenge, how can we educate in a way that really raises awareness?
That's a fantastic perspective. I appreciate it so much. Oren, what's your take?
I'll keep it short and simple. I think the opportunity is the sheer demand for it. The demand externally, the demand, whether it's investors or communities, and for us, the demand internally as well. We have to meet. And then the challenge, not to overplay this, but the standards and measurement. I think we need to get that right. We need to get that out there.
So one final thought from both of y'all. Where do you see this ESG space evolving in the next 5 years, and what is your perspective of the future?
So I'll speak specifically for healthcare. I said kind of in the opening, we get the S. It's our mission. We want to do good in the world. We want to heal. Everybody in the healthcare industry wants to do that. I think you're going to see more of the E in healthcare. And again, it goes back to the demand for it. Maybe not here in the United States, but around the world, healthcare providers and healthcare purchasers are governments. We're seeing a lot of environmental sort of procurement rules in Europe, for example. We're seeing it a bit here more at the, in the private sector, coming from big hospital systems, but also from GPOs, their group purchasing organizations, where smaller hospitals can get together and engage with technology manufacturers like us. The GPOs are leading on some of these requirements for the E piece as well. So I see the trend getting more, not getting away from the S, continuing with the social, getting more into the environmental health.
And Kisa, your take?
Sure. I see us focused a lot more on S as it relates to employee engagement. I'll tell you a bit about the tailwinds that give us that vision. Number one, you're seeing a lot of companies who we never thought would unionize before. They're unionizing now. I read about the New York Times just the other day having a one-day walkout. So I see a lot more companies that really have had a focus on ESG. Employees are saying, you're not doing enough, so we see that unionization. Also, we see employees who are stepping out on their own. We've heard of the, don't tell me what is it, there are several acronyms that I've heard. So there's the, oh my goodness, the term is, I call it silent sabotage, but quiet quitting, yeah. Silent sabotage is fine. I think that people can sabotage you within the firm. So, but quiet quitting, you see that a lot more. People are saying, you know what, I am balancing my work life and I'm doing it on my terms. So that's what some folks refer to as quiet quitting. Also, you see that with the inflationary environment, although there are several layoffs that we see happening at this time, it pales in comparison to what we saw back in 2008 after the financial crisis. We know this hitting the tech industry rather hard. But we see people who are continuing to go out on their own and they're not really concerned. This doesn't scare them, if you will. So I think those sorts of data points are leading us to see workers that have a greater level of power, that recognize their value, and who will use their power for good, so that workplace engagement, where businesses need to understand how to onboard workers and how to treat them once they get there, it's gonna be something.
Love that. So I'd like to open it up for one or two questions. We have a few minutes from the audience to see any thoughts you might have more on Artisa.
Thank you both for your time. Much appreciated. Very, very interesting points were brought up and discussed. So you mentioned, so the topic of education, how key it is to raising awareness. I was wondering, in the face of a reactionary response, which you can find, in the states we are very polarized as we are, to have that reactionary response to attempt to dialogue, what would you say should be done from the person who's engaging to mitigate this and actually?
So your question is, how can we mitigate issues or reactionary responses when we're looking to educate each other?
Exactly.
To me, that has little to do with ESG and more to do with psychology. So I'll give you my personal opinion there. Get some hand claps back there. I always try to put myself in the other person's position in their shoes, if you will. So I like to start, and I've read that this works, start conversations with, you know what, I understand that your view is that this sort of investing has no place in, you know, our pensions here in this state, because we might not all agree that this particular stock or security is not the right kind. And actually, I'm on the same page with you. I think there are some securities out there that people consider SIP stocks that I think are okay to invest in. So I agree with you that it can be relative. Is that what you're saying? Am I hearing correctly? And once they, you know, respond to that, so really putting themselves in yourself in their shoes, and not beginning the conversation from an argumentative perspective, but just saying that this is where you and I have a point of agreement. Let's first of all solidify that and honor that in each other. And then from there, just peel back later. So personal view, you know, it's not ESG related more so than psychologically how to engage.
And that's a skill you can use it with anybody at any time. You know, ask and listen to understand. It works in sales, it works in so many situations. Ask and then listen to understand, and then, you know, you can enter the dialogue from a better place.
Time for one last question.
I have a question for you. Isn't it about like GE Healthcare, but just more healthcare in general in the industry? I know there's a lot of, like, as you mentioned, ESG efforts, you know, sending technology to other countries and making sure that we're going to heal, we're working with employees. How do you kind of talk about issues, and this is an issue where it's like healthcare is unaffordable, or getting medications, people don't have access to life-saving medications, those systemic problems that are affecting, how can a place like GE Healthcare kind of work to solve those systemic issues rather than just, you know, within your own sphere?
Yeah, well, now you're in my wheelhouse, 'cause I do government affairs. And, you know, in this country, you know, policy dictates access. And so, you know, one probably, you asked me not to talk about GE Healthcare, but however, myself and my colleagues, no matter where we are, when we're in healthcare, there are tons of coalitions in Washington, and state capitals, and global capitals around the world. Our priority is patients. And, you know, whether it's eliminating co-pays, you know, reducing the cost of care, improving the quality of care, getting that right, getting that policy right, that is going to increase access is the goal. It's everybody's goal. It's the North Star. It's going to help companies like ours grow. It's going to help, you know, hospitals thrive and improve, and it's going to help communities be more healthy. And you really have to, you know, you led with kind of the economic aspect of it, or at least you put that in there. You know, you gotta convince policymakers that healthy communities are productive, right? And that works. That works here. That works all over the world. So that's how we in the healthcare sector approach those issues.
I'd like to open it for last thoughts before we conclude. Lisa, if you'd like to start.
Sure. Well, I think that from my perspective, I mentioned this a couple of times, but really leaning in on educating ourselves and understanding what some of these issues are, as well as supporting the education of other communities. Warren did a great job talking about bringing in to really focus in on some of these issues. Unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to solve the problem. Unfortunately, it's something that we pass down to another generation. But what we can do is that we can really commit ourselves to educating that generation, educating ourselves on how we can improve the situation from a climate perspective as well as from a social perspective, and work together to make sure we're on the same page in terms of measuring the issues, measuring what the problems are, and then coming to a conclusion on how we can solve it.
Oh, well, I just want to say how encouraged I am to see all of you that are here to learn about this and to engage. Nobody has all the answers. We've got a lot of questions, and it's going to take all of us to keep pushing and improving and demanding accountability of each other if we're going to move forward and do what we need to do for the planet.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much, and I appreciate both of you being on this fireside chat to conclude the main portion of our conference today. Before we head to the reception outside, I just wanted to take a few minutes to discuss further the Center for Social Value Creation. We've just launched this ESVC report that you received a hard copy of the overview. It's fully available on our website currently, which you can access from the QR code, but this is only the main cover. We have 9 separate industry aggregated reports, from healthcare to financial services to anything you might think of, where you can dive deeper and learn more about statistics, the trends, and where corporations need to go for best practices. If you're interested in engaging further with our center, you can either follow us at Creating Value on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, any social media, or subscribe to our newsletter, which you can find on our website as well.